So after nearly 13 years, Jamaican DJ Vybz Kartel is now free and acquitted of murder. How did that happen? And what lessons should we take from the self-styled teacher's experience? Stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me courtside. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. So what happened? Why did the Court of Appeal decide to not go ahead with a retrial for Vybz Kartel and his co-accused Andre St. John, Kahira Jones and Sean Campbell? Well, in this video, I'm going to be telling you the factors the Court of Appeal considered, what did they look at, and also what I think we should take away from this whole thing. Now, if you watch one of my previous videos in which I asked whether Vybz Kartel would be retried for murder, I spoke about the different factors that the courts will look at in making that decision. So in this particular case now, the Court of Appeal looked at those factors, but they added some more for a total of 12 things they looked at. Here are the 12 factors. The seriousness and prevalence of the offense, that is murder. The strength of the prosecution's case, the availability of prosecution witnesses and exhibits for a new trial, the availability of defense witnesses, delay and whether there can be a retrial in a reasonable time, the time and cost of a new trial and its impact on the court's resources. Then there's the ordeal of a new trial for the appellants, the impact of prejudicial publicity on the fairness of a new trial, whether a new trial would give the prosecution an unfair advantage, changes in the law, changes in the Jury Act, potential legislative changes in sentences for murder, and the possibility of the prejudicial effect of the mandatory minimum terms that someone would have to serve before being eligible for parole. The strongest factor here in favor of a retrial would be the seriousness of the offense, as I said, murder, as well as its prevalence in Jamaican society. How big a problem is murder in Jamaican society? And yes, we know it's a big problem. Here's the presiding judge in the matter and the new president of the Jamaican Court of Appeal, Justice Martha McDonald Bishop.
We commence by stating that the egregious nature and seriousness of the offense in this case is beyond argument. So too is the prevalence of the offense of murder in Jamaica. We make bold to say that the features of this case bear every hallmark of a deliberate attack on and barefaced defiance of law and order, involving allegations of transactions relating to illegal firearms, a killing in respect of which the body of the deceased has not been recovered, or should we say an alleged killing in which the body of the deceased has not been recovered, and interference with a crime scene while it was under the control of the police.
In fact, the court said these were powerful factors that weighed in favor of a retrial. And yet, no retrial. How come?
The court, however, finds that there are several equally powerful factors which, when combined, militate against ordering a new trial.
So what were these other factors that weighed then more heavily in favor of acquittal? You had the issue of the availability of prosecution witnesses and exhibits, and that was a problem for the court because the judge said she called it the insufficient and inadequate account by the prosecution for the availability of its witnesses and trial exhibits. In other words, the prosecution didn't convince the court that their witnesses would be available for a retrial, and there was a problem with the exhibits. So during the retrial hearing, the judges had been asking about that issue, of the availability of prosecution witnesses, and you could see they weren't satisfied with the answer they were getting. In addition, We heard from one of the attorneys representing the men, John Clark, that 25 exhibits had been produced or had been involved in the first trial, but only 14 of those had been verified as having been available for a possible second trial. And included in the exhibits that had not been verified as being available were some of the critical exhibits. The DVD, which contained the alleged video of the murder, also the DVD containing the voice notes. So this is a huge issue. What happened to those exhibits? Now that the case is over, somebody needs to explain to us what happened to those exhibits. And while they're at it, explain to us what happened during the first trial. If you remember, while Kartel's phone was in the custody of the state, it had been used. Somebody used the phone that was supposedly secured by the police. These are questions, these are issues that need to be addressed. Then now the complexity of the trial was an issue as well. Again, remember, trial lasting 64 days, and the judge pointed out that the cost, the amount of resources that it would take to mount a retrial was an issue here. The court also looked at the psychological, medical, and financial effects of a possible retrial on the men, given the fact that they had been in custody already for nearly 13 years. In particular, we heard about the medical reports that had been presented for Vybz Kartel that showed he was not in good health. He was suffering from Graves' disease, perhaps I should say is suffering from Graves' disease, which is a disease affecting the thyroid, and he's also having heart trouble, we're told. Again, factors in favor of an acquittal. The time they've been in custody, you keep hearing me say it, nearly 13 years was a big thing. It came up over and over in relation to the other issues that were being discussed. And the court looked at that, and also the fact that maybe it could be another 2 years if a retrial is ordered before that gets underway, which would mean they would then be in custody for about 15 years. And then now you're starting to seriously talk about their rights being breached, their constitutional right to a fair trial within a reasonable time being breached. Because the truth is, we actually don't know when a retrial would be. The Court of Appeal is saying 2 years. We don't know. It actually could be more. Now, we have to accept that this issue of delay played a huge role in the Court of Appeal deciding that they wouldn't order a retrial. And it's something we have to deal with. I know the courts have been working on it, but we still have to do better. There's some really disgraceful stories that have come out about people who have been, in prison awaiting retrial or trial for so long. And it's something, as I said, it's something we really have to deal with. I actually have a series that's going to be coming out called Justice Delayed. That's my little shameless plug. Make sure you watch out for that. But again, back to the ruling. The court was also very concerned about proposed changes to the law that could then see the length of time you would have to serve if convicted for murder before you're eligible for parole increase significantly. And their concern was against the background of the fact that they said 2 of the men could then possibly end up being sentenced to a harsher sentence, having to spend more time before being eligible for parole than had happened when they were sentenced at the first trial. That's not something that's supposed to happen. Your sentence in a retrial is not supposed to be harsher or longer than the sentence you received in the initial trial. So again, that would go to acquittal. The court also looked at the widespread publicity in this issue, but they said that that wasn't something that went to acquittal because the men would have to make a convincing case that the publicity was so extensive that it would be impossible to have a fair trial. And the Court of Appeal said that's a matter for a trial court. I know there are some very strong feelings about this ruling, I know there are people who feel that Kartel now has finally got justice, the free world boss crowd. You also have people who feel that the justice system has let down the country and that these men absolutely should have been sent for a retrial. So here's the thing. I think the court had a very difficult decision to make. I think they had a very important and very difficult balancing act that they had to carry out to try to determine which way to go, and they had to do all of that knowing that the world was watching. I think the issue of the time it would take for a retrial, how long ago the offense was committed, 2011, was a huge factor here that led to the acquittal. What you have to remember, don't forget, the convictions were quashed. So what that means is that you have 4 men in prison who are not guilty of anything. The presumption of innocence still applies. So they're not guilty of anything. They've already been in prison 13 years. And you start to talk, as I said earlier, about constitutional rights. It's simply not justice to expect that people are going to be sitting in prison for years and years awaiting a fair trial while the state gets its act together. Then now, remember, all this happened because the trial judge did not send home the juror who had tried to bribe the other members of the jury. And the reason he didn't do that, as we know, is because if he had done that, they wouldn't have enough jurors to continue the case. The case was at the very end and it would have to start over. But having said that, it's exposed a problem. Does this mean now that going forward, all you have to do is try to bribe some jurors and you can derail a case? I should stop and point out that the juror in this case, Livingston Kane, was found guilty of attempting to pervert the course of justice, and he was actually sentenced to 12 months in prison. Having said that, as I said, we've identified a problem, but we also know what the solution is, which is to amend the law so that in cases where you have to discharge the entire jury, the case can continue with the judge alone. We've heard this suggestion made from March when the Privy Council handed down its ruling, and yet, more than 4 months later, nothing has been done. Parliament, wanna wait for? Wake up, wake up. What do I think overall? I think it's really regrettable that these murder allegations were not probed at a fair trial so that the jury could have handed down a verdict which would have been regarded as fair. I think these were gruesome allegations of a gruesome murder, and I think in the circumstances, the victim, Clive Lizard Williams, as well as his family, his relatives, will now never get justice. And I think that's bad. I think that's terrible. Having said that, I also think the Court of Appeal got it right in deciding to order an acquittal. The state did not cover itself in glory in this case. The disappearing exhibits, first of all, should raise some very, very loud alarm bells for us. If the state cannot even maintain the integrity of exhibits in this kind of highly publicized case with the entire world watching, what happens if nobody is watching? I have to tell you, it does not fill me with confidence. I think, though, if you put Kartel and the others aside, right, take the personalities out of the picture along with the emotions that are associated with them. Instead, put in that picture your brother, your friend, your husband, your partner, and tell me honestly if you think it would be fair if you see them sit down there nearly 13 years in prison, still awaiting a fair trial, if you would really think it fair that a retrial should be ordered. And really and truly, that's what it comes down to here. I'm going to have to leave it there, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I should say I'm waiting to get the full judgment from the Court of Appeal to find out more about their reasoning here, and hopefully I'll do another video at that point. Also, there are a couple of other little interesting issues I want to do in a couple more videos as we wrap up this particular case. All right. Thanks again for watching. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. See you courtside next time.